The signal came on a quiet Tuesday evening. It was faint at first, almost like static crackling in the background of space. But as scientists listened closer, they realized it wasn't random noise. This was something intentional, something sent by someone or something far away. The message pulsed through the deep void of space, traveling across unimaginable distances until it finally reached Earth. When it arrived, it didn't come with flashy lights or booming sounds. Instead, it slipped into the world quietly, like a whisper carried by the wind. At the Global Space Communication Center, alarms began to blare. A team of scientists and engineers rushed to their stations, their faces tense with curiosity and urgency. The center was a massive facility buried underground, filled with rows of computers, blinking screens, and humming machines. It was here that humanity listened to the stars, hoping to catch even the smallest hint of life beyond Earth. For years, they had scanned the skies without success. But tonight, everything changed. Bill Harris sat at his desk, staring intently at the monitor in front of him. He was one of the lead linguists working on decoding extraterrestrial signals. His job was to make sense of patterns and symbols that no human had ever seen before. Tonight, however, he felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. The signal was unlike anything he'd encountered in his career. It wasn't just a series of numbers or tones. It sounded almost emotional. There was a rhythm to it, a kind of desperate urgency that made his skin crawl. "Are you hearing this?" Bill asked, turning to his colleague Sarah Mitchell. She nodded, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she tried to isolate the source of the transmission. "It's coming from somewhere near the edge of our galaxy," she replied, her voice tight with concentration. "But I've never seen anything like it." For hours, the team worked tirelessly, analyzing every second of the signal. They ran it through dozens of algorithms, trying to break it down into something understandable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they succeeded. The message was short but clear. "We are under siege. Our world is dying. Please send aid." The room fell silent as the words sank in. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just a casual message. It was a cry for help, a plea from beings who were clearly in dire need. The implications were staggering. Humanity had spent centuries wondering if intelligent life existed elsewhere in the universe. Now they had their answer, and it came with a heavy burden. News of the discovery spread quickly. Within hours, governments around the world were holding emergency meetings to discuss what to do next. Leaders debated fiercely, weighing the risks and benefits of responding to the call. Some argued that Earth couldn't afford to divert resources to help strangers so far away when there were still so many problems at home. Others believed this was an opportunity to prove that humanity could rise above its selfish tendencies and act as a force for good in the cosmos. In the end, the decision fell to General Patricia Monroe. As head of Earth's interstellar defense initiative, she had the final say in matters involving space exploration and defense. She was a stern woman in her late 50s, with sharp features and an even sharper mind. Her reputation was built on making tough decisions, and this was no exception. After reviewing all the data and consulting with her advisors, she made her choice. "We'll respond," she announced during a press conference broadcast worldwide. "But we won't send our best soldiers or brightest minds. Instead, we'll send those who have nothing left to lose." Her plan was controversial, to say the least. Rather than assembling a team of elite astronauts or scientists, she decided to recruit prisoners. Criminals serving life sentences would be offered a pardon if they agreed to undertake the dangerous mission. These individuals, hardened by years of living in Earth's most brutal penal colonies, became known as the Deathworlders, a name that struck fear into the hearts of anyone who heard it. The announcement sparked outrage among the public. Many questioned whether sending criminals was ethical or even practical. How could people who had broken laws on Earth be trusted to represent humanity on such an important mission? But General Monroe stood firm. She argued that these prisoners had skills and resilience that others lacked. They were survivors, used to enduring harsh conditions and impossible odds. If anyone could handle whatever awaited them on the alien planet, it was them. Back in the penal colonies, news of the mission spread like wildfire. Inmates gathered around small TVs, watching as General Monroe explained the terms of the deal. Some laughed bitterly, dismissing it as a death sentence, disguised as a second chance. Others saw it as an opportunity, a way to escape their bleak existence and perhaps even redeem themselves. Among those who volunteered were Jake Thompson, Maria Lopez, and Daniel Carter. Jake was a former soldier who had been convicted of insubordination after refusing to follow orders during a disastrous military operation. He was strong-willed and fiercely independent, traits that often got him into trouble. Despite his rough exterior, he had a strong moral compass and hated injustice. When he heard about the mission, he saw it as a chance to fight for something bigger than himself. Maria, on the other hand, was a hacker whose brilliant mind had landed her in prison after she was caught stealing classified information. She was quick-witted and resourceful, able to think several steps ahead of everyone else. Though she initially scoffed at the idea of helping aliens, she eventually agreed to join. Figuring it was better than rotting away in a cell, Daniel was a biologist whose experiments had gone horribly wrong, resulting in a catastrophic lab accident. Once respected in his field, he now lived with the guilt of knowing his mistakes had cost lives. He hoped that by joining the mission, he might find a way to make amends not just for his past crimes, but for the harm humanity had caused to the planet. As the chosen Deathworlders prepared to leave, they were briefed by Captain LeVar Bennett, a no-nonsense officer tasked with overseeing the mission. She was tall and athletic, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through people. Her job was simple: keep the prisoners alive long enough to complete their task or die trying. She didn't mince words when addressing the group. "You're not heroes," she told them bluntly. "You're expendable. Don't forget that." The crew boarded the vessel Eclipse, a repurposed mining ship retrofitted for interstellar travel. It wasn't sleek or advanced like the spaceships seen in movies. Instead, it was bulky and utilitarian, designed for function rather than style. Inside, the walls were lined with exposed wires and metal panels, giving it an almost industrial feel. The accommodations were cramped, with bunks stacked tightly together and little privacy, but none of them cared. They were too focused on what lay ahead. As the Eclipse launched into the void, Jake stared out the viewport, watching Earth shrink into nothingness. He thought about the people he was leaving behind, the friends and family who had given up on him long ago. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, this mission would give him a chance to start over. Maria sat nearby, tinkering with a handheld device she had smuggled aboard. She wasn't sure how useful it would be, but she figured it couldn't hurt to have a backup plan. Daniel paced nervously, muttering to himself as he reviewed notes on potential biological threats. Lavra watched them all silently, her expression unreadable. None of them knew exactly what they were getting into. All they knew was that somewhere out there, beings were suffering and humanity had sent them to help. Whether they succeeded or failed, one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same again. The journey through space was long and uneventful, but it wasn't without its challenges. The Eclipse moved steadily through the vast emptiness of the cosmos, surrounded by nothing but stars and silence. For days, the Deathworlders barely spoke to one another. Each of them had their own reasons for joining the mission, but none of them trusted the others. They were criminals, after all, people who had spent years surviving in harsh environments where loyalty was a luxury they couldn't afford. Jake Thompson spent most of his time staring out the viewport, watching the endless expanse of stars streak past. He didn't like being cooped up in such a small space with people he didn't know. It reminded him too much of prison, where every corner felt like a trap and every face hid a potential enemy. But Jake also knew that this mission was different. Out here, there was no warden or guards breathing down his neck. There was only the unknown and the chance to do something meaningful for the first time in years. Maria Lopez kept herself busy, tinkering with her handheld device. She had smuggled it aboard because she didn't trust anyone, not even Captain LeVar Bennett. Maria's mind was always working, always planning. She had learned early on that survival depended on staying 2 steps ahead of everyone else. Now, as she sat cross-legged on her bunk, she poked and prodded at the device, making sure it would work if she ever needed it. She didn't know what kind of technology they'd encounter on Veron 7, but she figured it couldn't hurt to have a backup plan. Daniel Carter, on the other hand, was restless. He paced back and forth in the cramped quarters, muttering under his breath as he flipped through pages of notes on his tablet. Daniel's mind raced with questions about the alien planet and the creatures living there. What kind of ecosystem had produced the beings who sent the distress signal? Were they intelligent? Dangerous? Could their biology hold clues to solving the crisis threatening their world? These thoughts swirled endlessly in his head, keeping him awake at night. Captain LeVar Bennett watched them all silently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She wasn't naive enough to think the group would suddenly become a well-oiled team overnight. They were criminals, hardened by years of hardship and mistrust. But Lavra had seen worse in her time as an officer. She knew how to handle difficult people, and she wasn't afraid to use whatever means necessary to keep order. Still, she couldn't deny that there was something oddly compelling about this mismatched crew. Each of them carried scars from their pasts, yet they had chosen to step into the unknown together to pass the time. Lavra decided to hold daily briefings. These weren't just updates on their progress. They were opportunities to remind the Deathworlders why they were here and what was at stake. "Listen up," she said during the first briefing, standing in front of the small gathering area. Her voice was firm but not unkind. "This isn't some joyride. You're here because Earth decided you were expendable. That doesn't mean you can slack off. If we fail, those aliens die, and so do we." Her words hung heavy in the air. No one dared to argue. Even Maria, who usually rolled her eyes at authority figures, nodded reluctantly. Lavra continued, laying out basic ground. "Rules. We stick together, no wandering off alone. And if I give an order, you follow it? Got it?" They mumbled their agreement, though Jake muttered something under his breath about not signing up for boot camp. Lavra shot him a warning glance, but let it slide for now. As the weeks passed, tensions began to ease slightly. Living in close quarters forced the group to interact more than they wanted to, and small moments of camaraderie started to emerge. One evening, while sitting around the tiny mess hall table, Daniel shared a story about his days as a biologist before the accident. At first, the others listened skeptically, but when he described his fascination with ecosystems and how delicate they could be, even Maria seemed interested. "You actually cared about bugs and plants?" Jake asked, raising an eyebrow. "Someone has to," Daniel replied with a shrug. "Everything's connected. Mess with one part, and the whole system falls apart." "That sounds kind of like us," Maria said quietly, surprising everyone, including herself. "If we don't figure out how to work together, we'll fall apart too," Lavra nodded approvingly. "She's right. Start thinking of yourselves as a team, or we won't make it 5 minutes on that planet." Despite these fleeting moments of connection, old habits died hard. Arguments still flared up over trivial things, like whose turn it was to clean the recycler or who hogged the last protein bar. Jake and Maria clashed constantly, their fiery personalities clashing like sparks against steel. Daniel tried to stay out of the fray, but even he found himself snapping at Maria when she made snide comments about his research. It wasn't until they reached the halfway point of their journey that things truly shifted. The ship's AI announced that they were approaching a massive asteroid field, a natural obstacle that required careful navigation. Lavra took the helm, her hand steady on the controls as she guided the Eclipse through the treacherous rocks. The others gathered in the cockpit, watching nervously as jagged boulders loomed closer and farther away in rapid succession. "This is insane," Maria muttered, gripping the edge of her seat. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" "I've done this before," LeVar replied curtly, her focus unwavering. "Just sit tight." For several tense minutes, the ship dodged and weaved through the chaos. Rocks scraped against the hull, sending shivers through the metal frame. Then, without warning, a large asteroid appeared directly in their path. Lavra yanked the controls hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a collision. Everyone gasped, hearts pounding. When they finally emerged on the other side, relief washed over them. Jake let out a low whistle. That was close. Too close, Daniel added, wiping sweat from his brow. Maria looked at Lavra with newfound respect. Guess you're not completely useless after all? Lavra smirked, but didn't respond. Instead, she turned to address the group. That was just a taste of what's coming. Once we land on Veron 7, it'll be 10 times worse. We need to start trusting each other, or we won't survive. Her words struck a chord. For the first time, the Deathworlders realized that they weren't just passengers on this mission. They were a team, whether they liked it or not. Slowly, they began to adjust their attitudes. Jake stopped picking fights with Maria, and Maria stopped rolling her eyes at everything Lavra said. Daniel even offered to help Jake repair a malfunctioning panel, earning a gruff but sincere thanks in return. By the time they reached the final stretch of their journey, the atmosphere aboard the Eclipse had changed. It wasn't perfect, they were still criminals, after all, but there was a sense of unity forming. They were no longer just individuals thrown together by circumstance. They were becoming something more, survivors bound by a shared purpose. And then one day, the ship's sensors picked up their destination. Veron 7 glowed faintly in the distance, its surface shimmering with colors that defied description. As they drew closer, details began to emerge: towering mountains, sprawling forests, and rivers that sparkled like liquid diamonds. It was breathtakingly beautiful, unlike anything any of them had ever seen, but beauty often hides danger, and the Deathworlders knew better than to let their guard down. Somewhere on that planet, beings were suffering, and it was their job to help. As the Eclipse prepared to enter the atmosphere, Lavra gave one final reminder: whatever happens down there, remember this, we're all we've got. Stick together, and maybe, just maybe, we'll make it out alive. No one spoke as the ship descended toward the alien world. Their nerves were taut, their minds racing with questions and fears. None of them knew what awaited them on Veron 7. But for the first time, they faced it together, not as prisoners, not as criminals, but as humans ready to prove that redemption was possible, even in the darkest corners of the universe. The Eclipse touched down on Veron 7 with a soft thud, its landing gear sinking slightly into the soft, moss-like ground. The planet was unlike anything the Deathworlders had ever seen. Towering trees stretched high into the sky, their trunks glowing faintly as if lit from within. Rivers of shimmering liquid wound through the landscape, reflecting colors that seemed to shift and dance in the dim light. Strange creatures flitted between the trees, some resembling birds but with translucent wings that sparkled like glass. It was beautiful, almost dreamlike, but beneath the surface, something felt wrong. As the crew stepped off the ship, they were greeted by an eerie silence. There were no sounds of wildlife calling to one another, no rustling leaves or chirping insects. The air was thick and humid, pressing against their skin like a heavy blanket. Jake took a deep breath, his hand instinctively resting on the weapon strapped to his side. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered under his breath. Maria adjusted the straps on her backpack, glancing around nervously. "Yeah, well, creepy is better than dead," she replied. "Let's just find those aliens and get this over with." Captain LaVarbanet scanned the horizon, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She didn't like the stillness either. Quiet places usually meant danger lurking just out of sight. "Stay alert," she ordered, her voice firm. "We don't know what's out here." It wasn't long before they spotted movement in the distance. A group of tall, slender figures emerged from the forest, their iridescent skin shimmering in the twilight. They moved gracefully, their elongated limbs making them look almost otherworldly. These were the Kryn, the beings who had sent the distress signal. Their leader, Zinara, stepped forward, her luminous eyes locking onto the humans. "Welcome," Zinara said, her voice melodic yet tinged with sadness. She spoke in broken English, clearly struggling to communicate. "You came." Lavra nodded, stepping forward cautiously. "We're here to help," she said. "Tell us what's happening." Zinara gestured for them to follow, leading the group deeper into the forest. As they walked, she explained the situation. A parasitic organism had invaded their world, spreading rapidly and consuming everything in its path. Plants, animals, even parts of their cities had been overtaken by the infection. The parasite mutated whatever it touched, twisting living things into grotesque versions of themselves. The Kryn had tried everything to stop it, but it was too powerful. Now, their civilization was on the brink of collapse. Daniel listened intently, his mind racing with questions. What about the structure you mentioned? He asked. The one that might hold the key to stopping this thing? Zinara paused, turning to face him. Deep within, the heart of the infestation, she said slowly. Dangerous path. Many perils, but if activated, hope remains. Jake frowned, looking at the others. So we're supposed to march straight into the belly of the beast? Great plan. Maria crossed her arms, shaking her head. You heard the alien. This isn't exactly a vacation spot. If we're going to pull this off, we'll need more than guts. We'll need brains and maybe a miracle. Lavra ignored their complaints, focusing instead on the task ahead. We'll need to move quickly, she said. The longer we wait, the worse it gets. Let's gather supplies and prepare for the journey. The Kryn provided them with maps and rudimentary tools, though much of the technology was unfamiliar. Daniel studied the equipment closely, trying to figure out how it worked. This could be useful, he said, holding up a small device that emitted a faint hum. If I can modify it, we might be able to detect the parasite before it attacks. Maria raised an eyebrow. Good luck with that. I'll stick to what I know. She pulled out her handheld device, tapping away at the screen. I'm working on a way to hack into their systems. Maybe we can find some weak points or shortcuts. Jake rolled his eyes. You two are wasting time. We should just grab our gear and go. Sitting around won't save anyone. Lavra shot him a warning glance. We're not charging in blind. Preparation is key. Now let's focus. After a few hours of planning, the group set off toward the heart of the infestation. The journey was grueling from the start. The terrain was treacherous with jagged rocks, dense underbrush, and rivers of acidic water that bubbled ominously. Every step felt like a battle against the environment itself. But the real dangers soon revealed themselves. On the second day, they encountered their first mutated creature, a massive insectoid beast with razor-sharp mandibles and glowing red eyes. It burst from the trees without warning, screeching loudly as it charged at them. Jake reacted instantly, firing his weapon, while shouting for the others to take cover. Maria ducked behind a fallen log, pulling out her device to scan the creature. Daniel scrambled to adjust the humming tool, hoping it would repel the beast. Keep it busy, Lavra shouted, aiming her own weapon. The combined firepower drove the creature back, but not before it slashed at Jake's arm. He cursed it under, his breath clutching the wound as blood seeped through his fingers. You okay? Lavra asked, rushing to his side. I'll lave, Jake growled, gritting his teeth. But next time, let's try not to get eaten. The attack left them shaken but more determined than ever. They patched up Jake's injury and pressed on, knowing they couldn't afford to slow down. Each new challenge tested their limits, pushing them closer to breaking points. Yet somehow they kept moving forward. On the fourth day, they reached a clearing where the effects of the parasite were unmistakable. Trees twisted unnaturally, their bark oozing a black, tar-like substance. The ground was littered with the remains of mutated creatures, their bodies bloated and decaying. The air smelled foul, like rotting flesh mixed with chemicals. Even the light seemed dimmer here, as if the parasite drained life from everything it touched. This is bad, Daniel murmured, examining a piece of infected bark. Whatever this thing is, it's not just consuming, it's transforming, adapting if we don't stop it soon. We will, Lavar interrupted firmly. We have to. That night, tensions boiled over. Exhaustion and fear had worn thin on everyone's nerves. Maria snapped at Jake when he questioned her hacking progress, accusing him of doubting her abilities. Jake fired back, blaming her for slowing them down. Daniel tried to mediate, but even he lost his temper when Maria mocked his theories. You Think this is easy? Daniel shouted, his voice cracking. None of us signed up for this. We're all scared, but yelling at each other won't fix anything. Lavra stepped in, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Enough, she barked. We're a team, whether you like it or not. Start acting like one or turn around and go home. Your choice. The words hit hard. For a moment, no. One spoke, then, slowly, Maria lowered her gaze. Sorry, she muttered, though it pained her to admit it. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, me too. Let's just keep going. By the 7th day, they finally reached the structure Zinara had described. It loomed above them, a towering monolith carved with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with energy. The entrance was sealed, guarded by vines that writhed like living serpents. Inside, the air was cold and metallic, filled with the hum of ancient machinery. This is it, Daniel whispered, awestruck. If we can activate this, we might actually stand a chance. But as they began working to unlock the controls, the parasite itself manifested. A colossal mass of writhing tendrils and pulsating flesh erupted from the walls, blocking their escape. Its form shifted constantly, merging and splitting like liquid shadows. Eyes opened across its surface, glaring at them with malevolent intelligence. Lavra shouted orders, rallying the group to defend the controls while Daniel input the final sequence. Maria hacked into the system, rerouting power to overload the device. Jake charged forward, drawing the creature's attention and buying precious seconds. Just as the parasite lunged toward him, the machine roared to life, emitting a blinding pulse of energy that swept across the land. When the light faded, the parasite was gone, and so were most of the mutations plaguing the planet, exhausted. But victorious, the Deathworlders collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily. They had done the impossible. Against all odds, they had saved an alien world and perhaps, in doing so, redeemed themselves. The blinding pulse of energy from the ancient structure rippled outward like a wave, washing over the landscape and erasing the parasite's presence. The air, once heavy with decay and corruption, suddenly felt lighter, cleaner. The writhing tendrils that had emerged from the walls dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only silence. For a moment, no one moved. They simply lay there, their bodies drained and their minds struggling to process what had just happened. Jake was the first to stir. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, wincing as pain shot through his injured arm. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Is it over? He asked, his voice hoarse. Maria sat up slowly, clutching her handheld device tightly in her hand. Her fingers trembled as she glanced around the room. I think so, she said softly. Whatever that thing was, it's gone. Daniel remained on the floor, staring at the glowing control panels embedded in the walls. His mind raced with questions about how the structure worked and who or what had built it. But for now, all he could manage was a weak nod. It's done, he murmured. We did it. Lavra stood last, brushing dust and debris off her uniform. She looked exhausted but resolute, her sharp eyes scanning the chamber one final time to ensure there were no lingering threats. When she spoke, her voice carried both relief and authority. Good work, everyone. Let's get out of here before anything else decides to show up. The group gathered their gear and made their way back outside. The transformation of Veron 7 was astonishing. The once twisted trees now stood tall and healthy, their glowing bark radiating warmth instead of menace. The rivers sparkled brightly, their waters clear and pure. Even the creatures that had fled during the infestation were beginning to return, their movements cautious but curious. As they stepped into the open, Zinara and several other Kryn approached them. Their expressions were filled with awe and gratitude, their luminous eyes reflecting the renewed beauty of their world. Zinara bowed deeply, her voice trembling with emotion. You have saved us, she said. Your courage has given us hope when we thought all was lost. Lavra nodded respectfully. We're glad we could help. But this is your victory too. You held on long enough for us to arrive. Zinara reached out, placing a delicate hand on Laura's shoulder. You are more than helpers, you are heroes. And you will always be welcome among the Kryn. The aliens. led the Deathworlders to a nearby settlement where celebrations were already underway. Fires burned brightly in the center of the village, casting flickering light across the faces of the Kryn as they danced and sang. Food and drink were offered generously, though much of it was strange and unfamiliar to the humans. Jake hesitated before taking a bite of something that looked like fruit but tasted faintly metallic. Maria wrinkled her nose at a bubbling drink but sipped it anyway, shrugging when she realized it wasn't half bad. Despite the festivities, the Deathworlders couldn't fully relax. They were still far from home and the weight of what they had accomplished and what awaited them back on Earth was never far from their thoughts. Daniel wandered away from the crowd, sitting alone near the edge of the village. He stared at the stars, wondering if humanity would ever learn to live peacefully with itself, let alone with others. Maria joined him after a while, sitting cross-legged beside him. "You okay?" she asked, her usual sarcasm softened by genuine concern. Daniel shrugged. "I don't know. I keep thinking about how close we came to failing if that structure hadn't worked." "But it did," Maria interrupted firmly, "and we survived. That's got to count for something." Jake walked over a few moments later, plopping down next to them. "Yeah, well, surviving doesn't mean we're free yet. What happens when we get back? Do they throw us back in prison or do we get medals? Either way, it's not gonna be pretty." Lavra appeared behind them, having overheard the conversation. "None of us knows what's waiting for us back on Earth," she admitted. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together. We've earned that much." Her words struck a chord. For the first time, the Deathworlders allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't doomed to repeat their past mistakes. Maybe the mission had changed them in ways they hadn't even realized yet. The journey back to the eclipse was quieter than the trip to the structure. The Kryn escorted them partway, ensuring their path was safe, before bidding them farewell with heartfelt thanks. As the ship lifted off from Veron 7, the Deathworlders watched the planet shrink into the distance. Its vibrant colors faded into the blackness of space, but its memory lingered in their minds. Inside the cockpit, Jake leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. "Do you think anyone back home will care about what we did?" he asked, breaking the silence. "They should," Daniel replied. "But whether they do or not, we'll know the truth. That's what matters." Maria smirked, leaning forward to adjust a dial on the console. "Speak for yourself. I'm planning on cashing in on this whole hero thing. Free food for life sounds pretty good to me." Lavra chuckled despite herself. "Don't push your luck." As the Eclipse entered hyperspace heading toward Earth, the mood aboard the ship shifted. There was a sense of accomplishment mixed with apprehension. They had done the impossible, but now they faced an uncertain future. Would humanity see them as criminals who had redeemed themselves, or simply as disposable tools sent to clean up someone else's mess? When the Eclipse finally re-entered Earth's orbit, the crew braced themselves for judgment. News of their mission had spread widely during their absence, sparking debates across the globe. Some viewed the Deathworlders as unlikely saviors, proof that even the most broken individuals could rise to the occasion. Others saw them as dangerous criminals who had been given too much freedom. General Patricia Monroe greeted them personally. Upon their arrival, her expression unreadable. She listened intently as Laval gave a detailed report of the mission, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When the briefing concluded, Monroe turned to address the group directly. "You've done humanity proud," she said, her tone measured but sincere. "Not because you succeeded, but because you chose to try. That takes courage." Jake crossed his arms, scowling slightly. "So, does this mean we're free to go?" Monroe hesitated before answering. "Yes, your sentences have been commuted. Consider this your second chance." There was a collective exhale of relief. None of them had dared to hope for such an outcome. Maria grinned, leaning back in her chair. "Guess we're not Deathworlders anymore." "Don't get cocky," Lavra warned, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "Freedom doesn't mean you can stop fighting." As they left the debriefing room, the four of them exchanged glances. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, they felt ready to face it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew they wouldn't face them alone. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jake paused, looking up at the horizon. "You think they'll remember us?" he asked quietly. "I think they already have," Daniel replied, smiling faintly. "And maybe, just maybe, they'll learn something from it." Maria nudged him playfully. "Or they'll write a book about us." "I call dibs on being the main character." Lava rolled her eyes, shaking her head. "Come on, let's go." Together they walked toward the unknown, carrying with them the lessons of Varan 7 and the hope that redemption was possible even for those who least deserved it. The weeks following their return to Earth were a whirlwind of attention and uncertainty. The Deathworlders found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their faces plastered across news outlets and social media platforms worldwide. Some hailed them as heroes, ordinary criminals who had risen above their past to save an alien civilization. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether people with such troubled histories could truly change. Despite the mixed reactions, one thing was clear: the mission had changed them, and perhaps humanity as well. Jake Thompson struggled the most with the sudden fame. He wasn't used to being in the public eye, and the constant scrutiny made him uneasy. Reporters followed him everywhere, asking questions about his time in prison, his role on Varan 7, and what he planned to do next. At first, Jake brushed them off, giving short, gruff answers that only fueled more curiosity. But as days turned into weeks, he began to open up, albeit reluctantly. During one interview, a young journalist asked him why he had volunteered for the mission. Jake hesitated, staring at the floor before answering. "I didn't have much to lose," he admitted, "but I guess I wanted to prove something, to myself mostly, that I could still make a difference." His words resonated with many viewers, especially those who had written him off as just another criminal. People started seeing him not as a failure, but as someone who had fought for redemption and won. Maria Lopez, on the other hand, embraced the attention with her signature mix of sarcasm and wit. She gave interviews wearing bold outfits and spoke candidly about her experiences, often making jokes that left audiences laughing. Beneath her confident exterior, however, Maria wrestled with doubts. She worried that people would forget about her once the hype died down, leaving her right back where she started, alone and unwanted. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of media appearances, Maria sat on the balcony of her temporary apartment, staring out at the city lights. Jake joined her, holding 2 bottles of soda. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her one. Maria smirked, taking a sip. "You're such a gentleman." "What's your angle?" "No angle," Jake replied with a shrug. "Just figured you could use a break from all the chaos." They sat in silence for a while, watching the cars zoom by below. Finally, Maria broke the quiet. "Do you think they'll really let us start over? Or is this just some PR stunt until they figure out how to lock us up again?" Jake sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know. But we've got a shot. Now we might as well take it." Maria nodded slowly, though her expression remained uncertain. Deep down, she wanted to believe him, but trust didn't come easily to her. Daniel Carter spent much of his time reflecting on the mission and its implications. He avoided the media circus, choosing instead to focus on writing a detailed report about the parasite and the ancient structure on Varan 7. His findings fascinated scientists around the world, sparking discussions about the possibilities of interstellar cooperation and the ethics of intervening in alien ecosystems. But Daniel's work wasn't just academic. It was personal. Every night he thought about the mistakes that had landed him in prison, the lab accident, the lives lost because of his carelessness. Saving the Kryn hadn't erased his guilt, but it had given him a sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he felt like he was contributing something meaningful. Lavra Bennett, meanwhile, returned to her duties as an officer, but found herself changed by the experience. Leading the Deathworlders had taught her patience, empathy, and the importance of second chances. She advocated for reforms within the Interstellar Defense Initiative, pushing for programs that would give prisoners opportunities to redeem themselves through service. Her efforts weren't always welcomed. Many officials dismissed her ideas as naive or impractical, but Lavra persisted, determined to honor the sacrifices made by her team. These people risked everything to help strangers they'd never met, she argued during a heated meeting. If we can't see their potential, then what does that say about us? As months passed, the Deathworlders began to build new lives for themselves. Jake took a job working with at-risk youth, using his experiences to mentor kids who reminded him of his younger self. He rented a small apartment in the city, filling it with books and plants, a far cry from the cold, sterile cells he'd once called home. Maria launched a cybersecurity startup, leveraging her hacking skills to protect businesses from digital threats. Her company quickly gained traction, earning praise for its innovative approach to online security. Though she still kept her handheld device close, she no longer needed it to feel safe. For the first time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Daniel joined a research team studying extraterrestrial biology, eager to apply what he'd learned on Veron 7 to future missions. His colleagues respected his expertise, and his reports became required reading for anyone interested in interstellar exploration. On weekends, he volunteered at a local science center, teaching children about the wonders of the universe. Lavra continued to serve in the military, but her role evolved. She became a liaison between Earth's government and potential alien allies, helping to establish protocols for peaceful communication and collaboration. Her work earned her promotions and accolades, but she remained humble, always crediting her team for inspiring her journey. Despite their individual successes, the Deathworlders stayed in touch, meeting regularly to share stories and support one another. They knew better than anyone that redemption wasn't a solo journey. It required community, trust, and perseverance. And though they had started as strangers thrown together by circumstance, they had become something more, a family bound by shared struggles and triumphs. 1 year after their return, they gathered at Laura's house for a private celebration. The living room was decorated with photos from their mission, souvenirs gifted by the Kryn, and a cake shaped like the eclipse. As they sat around the table, laughter and conversation filled the air. "To us," Lavra said, raising her glass. "To surviving, learning, and proving that even the worst among us can do great things." "To us," the others echoed, clinking their glasses together. Later that night, as the party wound down, Jake stepped outside onto the porch. The sky was clear, dotted with stars that seemed impossibly distant yet somehow familiar. He thought about Veron 7, the Kryn, and everything they had overcome. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Hey," Maria called from behind him. "What are you doing out here?" Jake glanced over his shoulder. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Maria leaned against the railing, gazing up at the stars. "Yeah, who would have thought we'd end up here?" "Not me," Jake admitted. "But I'm glad we did." Maria nodded, her tone softening. "Me too." They stood there quietly, side by side, watching the universe stretch endlessly above them. Somewhere out there, the Kryn were rebuilding their world, grateful for the unlikely heroes who had saved them. And somewhere on Earth, 4 former prisoners were doing the same, building new lives, forging new paths, and proving that even the darkest chapters could lead to brighter tomorrows. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt hopeful. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they wouldn't face them alone. Together they had faced the unknown and emerged stronger. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.